So this morning we're going to start off with state reports. And so if we have somebody from Washington, we have James Pirabello with Pirabello Public Affairs. And then next up is a report from Oregon, Mr. Mark Cruz. From there, and Idaho is Cage Matheson. And Codge, thank you. So I'm just not doing well on names this morning. Sorry. So, all righty. So, and state reports are till 9:30. So we're trying to stay on schedule. So I think we're doing okay.
Remember to project your voice because it's really clear.
Okay. Did somebody say they couldn't hear me?
No, I just read yesterday.
Okay.
We called them all at once, so that we're going to move down. So
Okay.
that all three come up.
Okay.
And remember to give them a gift.
Okay. So Jeannie was saying, will all state report people come up and take a seat up on the stage? Then you can just follow each other. So individually. But if we can have the state report people come up. And also, can the people in the back hear us on the mic? Okay, I see a hand all the way to the back. So, okay, thank you.
Julie's next, so you should tell her to have her people ready. She's got 4, 5, 6 people. Julie, right after these guys talk.
Okay. Following our state reports, could we have our native candidates forum people be on deck for us here too? So we have Julie Johnson is our moderator. And so too, we have Tana Sanchez, she's from Oregon. Anessa Hartman is from Oregon. Chris Stearns, Bob Ayala, and then, sorry, I'm just doing terrible on names this morning. Patrick DePoe and Jonathan Nez. So those are the candidates formed following our state reports. So, okay. And so we have a Washington state report first. Mr. Jane.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm James Pirabello, and I'm the lobbyist for the Cowlitz tribe here in Washington State. So I spend most of my days in Olympia representing the tribe. Hopefully everybody can hear me all right. I'm here to talk a little bit about or give a little preview of the 2025 legislative session, which begins in January this year, and talk about some of the major themes that will impact and affect tribes across the state. Just give a high overview, preview of what we can expect, to hear from legislators and what we expect to tell legislators going forward. I know there'll be plenty of breakout sessions in the coming days here that'll do deeper dives into many other issues, but I just wanted to report on some of the things that I'm hearing from legislators and the executive branch as to what we can expect. So I'll begin with the budget outlook for the next biennium, which begins this year. The legislators will be convening to build a new budget for the state for the biennial cycle. And the themes that we're hearing about the budget is a bit ominous, that they're telling us to be very careful what we're asking for because the state is facing a fiscal deficit that is, as the OFM director told me, structural, not directly related to any kind of economic downturn, but structural in nature. There's still a bit of a hangover from the influx of federal money that was granted to the state through the pandemic aid that came here. Washington isn't alone in that there are many states that are facing the same structural deficits and took advantage of those surpluses to create new programs, invest heavily in new capital infrastructure and other projects. But now, with that money drying up, there is a bit of a hangover, as the OFM director said. And exacerbating those conditions are spending pressures such as growing Medicaid and employee medical retirement costs, and just not enough revenue to cover those costs going forward. So those cost of living increases must be addressed with contract negotiations, and much of the general fund is contingent upon filling those buckets first. Of course, there are big plans to continue investments in basic education, K-12 funding, and address aging population needs, but we're looking at a multi-billion-dollar shortfall in general fund maintenance. And I'll touch on some of these aspects a little bit more, but the budget situation can also be exacerbated by some of the initiatives on the ballot this election cycle, particularly the Climate Commitment Act, which is the Initiative 2117, and the Capital Gains Tax, which is Initiative 2109. The Climate Commitment Act that passed here in 2021, with the help of many tribes in the state, aims to lower the carbon emissions through Washington State, in part through carbon credit auctions. And so far it's been raising quite a bit of money, more than was expected, but in the range of about $1 billion a year. And 10% of that revenue generated from the carbon credit auctions is specifically allocated to Washington tribes. And another 35% of that revenue is generated to, or granted to frontline communities, which tribal nations are also included in. Many of you in Washington may be seeing some of the benefits of those grants already in the form of solar array installations, EV charging stations, electrifying cars and fishing fleets, improving air quality, and then, of course, generating your own clean energy projects. With this initiative, or the loss of the CCA, it would result in hundreds of millions of dollars lost to tribes. And the message that I hear from a lot of legislators that I talk to and other tribal lobbyists we talk to, they say that it's much of what we want to accomplish is contingent upon the survival of the CCA. So it's an extremely important issue on the ballot for tribes and the values and priorities that we bring to the legislature. In other ominous budget news, I'll quickly touch on the transportation budget, which, as many of you know, is also in a dire situation with gas tax revenue continuing to decrease as fleets of cars continue to electrify. And much of the Climate Commitment Act, or a good portion of the Climate Commitment Act, also supported the transportation budget to the tune of about above $300 million a year, including $196 million towards the construction of 5 new hybrid electric ferries. The declining gas tax revenue is something that legislators are beginning to explore solutions for. And one idea in particular is switching to a road use charge, as they call it, the chairman of the House Transportation Committee, has been holding some listening sessions, inviting tribal lobbyists and other stakeholders to participate in those, where they haven't really settled on a concept of a plan yet, but are asking for some feedback, and the details still need to be worked out, but tribes will have a big role to play in what comes next after the gas tax. And there's also a big role to play in educating legislators, particularly on the transportation committees, about sovereignty and road use charges and how that affects the existing fuel compacts. Something that I don't believe a lot of legislators are familiar with, and how that may affect tribes going forward. So a lot of questions still must be addressed before any proposal is on the table in the legislature, and we definitely need to have a voice in that process. Switching from budgetary matters to some of the policies that we have been facing, some of the themes that are perennial issues of the legislature. I'm going to touch first on water, life source for a lot of tribes, and sustaining the tribal way of life here. So year after year in Washington, as I'm sure you know and probably deal with in your own states as well, Washington tribal lobbyists joined forces with tribal leaders to fight back legislation that would erode treaty rights and diminish court decisions that tribes have won to protect the wildlife and the wild lands here. It's sustained the way of life for millennia. But every year the pressure grows. More and more people move to Washington, more and more demands occur on our water supply, efforts to roll back protections, watershed protections, riparian habitat protections, in-stream flow protections are always on the table and at risk, and efforts to bypass tribes' concerns grow as well. For years we've been successful in stopping these bills before they get passed, but that pressure continues to grow. Legislators are trying to balance the need for infilling development and meet the need for more housing, particularly with growing scarcity of these resources, especially water. This year, biennium will be no different. Some of my colleagues and I have already been approached by legislators wondering how to balance both sides' concerns here. And some bills blatantly attempt to roll back protections for in-stream flows through transfer of water rights and such. And other bills are maybe less, they seem less innocuous, but they would do the same. Examples would be freeing local governments to permit more development, more ADUs on properties to increase housing stock. But what they're asking tribes to do is essentially look the other way and let growth happen without holding the local counties and governments accountable for following the state's rules and pay for the cost of these new hookups and new developments in existing water sources. So fighting back against a constant onslaught of bad water bills is a perennial task for any tribal lobbyist and tribal leader here. And there are legislators intent on defending the state's position, but tribes must remain vigilant and must continue to assert their sovereignty and their legal standing and continue to engage in these fights. And hand in hand with water, of course, is the protection of the salmon. And on these fights, on behalf of the salmon, we've made some gains in funding in recent years, but there's still not enough. I'll just quickly mention one idea that is being proposed for this biennium. It's another one of these very initial stage bills, concept of a plan, I like to call it, but exploring how we can secure funding via the capital budget through bonding to fund the state's 5 core programs for salmon recovery, which are the Salmon Recovery Funding Board, the Puget Sound Acquisition Restoration Program, the Estuary and Salmon Restoration Program, and the Family Forest Fish Passage Program, along with the Brian Abbott Fish Passage Barrier Removal. That's a lot of words that I'm stumbling over here, sorry. Brian Abbott Fish Passage Barrier Removal Program. The proposal that's on the table would simply set aside bond capacity for salmon to secure and hopefully enhance these programs well into the future. More details on those to come as the details get worked out, but it seems like a promising path forward. And touch on both the Climate Commitment Act and clean energy future, which is a big number one priority, I would say, of Governor Inslee's administration along his tenure. But just last week, Governor Inslee met with tribal leaders at the state's Centennial Accord and made his case for more clean energy generation to meet the state's growing demand. He was also quoted in the media as warning that we need to increase power generation in order to keep fueling the data centers and AI computers and servers, which he hopes will make Washington the industry hub for that technology. But as I like to say, it's not artificial intelligence that's going to save our climate and our water and our habitat. It's going to be the intelligence in this room, the indigenous intelligence that's going to direct the path forward here, because we know what is good for tribes here in Washington and elsewhere is good for communities beyond the reservations throughout the state and the Northwest. So at the current rate, the state's electric utilities won't meet their mandated goals to fully transition to clean energy by 2045. Population growth, the switch to an electrified transportation industry, the growth of more homes, data centers, servers, and farms are outpacing that transition so far. But what we need to watch out for fundamentally is, can tribes achieve energy independence and further become the clean energy generators that serve their own people and become regional power generators and outcompete the traditional utilities while saving our wild lands, our ancestral lands, and the way of life that we have prioritized here. There is an opportunity for tribes to capitalize on this ability, think and act more nimbly than the state, than the current energy providers, and with the CCA dollars, if it survives, and federal dollars, acquire the funding necessary to achieve it. So in the immediate future, legislators following the election will assemble back in Olympia in December and go through a reorganization. We won't necessarily know who will be chairing the committees or staffing the committees until late December, but we will hit the ground running in January. I'd just like to conclude on one note, and one important note here in Washington State, and that is on the elections this cycle. In the executive branch alone, we're going to see a new governor, a new attorney general, a new insurance commissioner, a new lands commissioner, possibly a new superintendent of public instruction. We'll see the makeup of the legislature change more so this year than any year I've been around the legislature, which is over 20 years now. Of the 49 legislative districts in the state, there are 27 open seats, and we could see as many as 40 new elected officials. It's an incredible turnover, generational turnover. And that's not counting the sophomores, which are still getting up to speed, I think. While the Democrats look to increase their majorities in the legislature and could even achieve supermajorities, we're looking at an unprecedented changing of the guard here. Nearly a third of legislators will be newbies, and that doesn't count ones who, as I mentioned, will be in their second or third term now. Many of these legislators you may already have relationships with. Many will be coming from underrepresented communities, but the takeaway here that I want to impart is with all of these new elected officials, introductions and education are going to be of the utmost importance. And we know this has to happen early and often, so it sinks in, but it's an unprecedented time to make your voice heard in Olympia. Those there know that when you walk in the door, you're to be taken seriously. And while they may be familiar with some tribal issues, with these policy issues, with some equity issues, they're very likely unfamiliar with what sovereignty means and what sovereignty is to you. It's so important to introduce you and your tribal communities to them, show them who you are, show them your priorities, your values, and the value that you bring to the communities, the region, and the state beyond the borders of your reservations. And most importantly, your rights as guaranteed in the Constitution as treaty signatories and as the direct descendants of the people who have lived on this land for millennia. And you have so much to teach them. We don't want them picking up any bad habits or old ways of thinking. This is a great opportunity now that we cannot pass up. We can show them the accomplishments, share the challenges in Indian country, and build new allies, and continue achieving great things, even in challenging times. So with that, I will conclude and hand it off. But thank you very much for the time. Happy to meet with anybody afterwards and answer any questions, but thank you very much.
Alrighty. Oh. Henry has a question. Mr. Henry, you can turn your mic on too. Just hold that button down. Okay, Henry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Henry Key with the Lummi Nation. And I appreciate the report that was given, but one of the things that we want to remind the Washington State tribes is this cap and trade, is that something that, has been a problem for a lot of our fishermen, a lot of our people. This bill, when it was passed in 22, the governor vetoed all the provisions out for the tribal people. We all remember what happened with Fawn and the governor over that. So what's happened now is that these fees that we're seeing on our fuel, 40, 50, 60 cents a gallon fees, that we were never consulted on these fees. So what we're seeing on the reservation is our people are living in poverty, they're paying those fees. Our fishermen are paying those fees. And it's a tough thing to be a fisherman today. So today at 11 o'clock, we're having a meeting with the ecology folks and the licensing folks to talk about these things that they need to address. So we're inviting some of the Washington tribes to come and listen. If you don't know about cap and trade, we've been after the state to amend that law and look at addressing our people. We see it as a sovereignty issue with the state that they continue to ignore. So we want the support from the legislators, the tribal leadership, to really look at this cap and trade in a way that addresses our people. So again, that's the issue. I'm not against climate change and all that stuff. It's for our people. is what I'm for. So again, and the problem I have with this thing is the state keeps dangling this money in front of us, saying, oh, here's $2 million, here's $4 million, that we've already paid in. Our tribe alone has paid over $40 million into this fund. You know, so we're very concerned on how the state keeps to continue to, you know, take our leadership and bribe them with money. You know, so it's not about money, it's about our sovereignty. So again, Mr. President, thank you.
All right, thank you. So next we have is our state report from Oregon. Yes, and so Mr. Mark Cruz.
Good morning. Let's see if this present, all right, the slideshow works and I got the clicker this morning. So good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Cruz. I'm from Gallatin Public Affairs. Happy October. I can't believe it's already here. We're only 35 days from the election, 112 days from the first day of session. It'll be here before we know it. It's nice to be back here at ATNI. Thank you, Amber, for inviting me. Thank you to the ATNI staff. And I want to give a special shout out to all the wonderful server staff we've had here at LNA. So I don't want to jinx anything, but last time I spoke here at ATNI, it was actually 1 month before a global pandemic. So if anything crazy happens next month, don't blame me. It's nice to be here in front of my elders and my chairman and my clients, Cauvel and Willamette Falls Trust. Thank you. I'm happy to be here. And I want to give a special shout out to a fellow Klamath tribal member. Nathan Dexter is 49 years young today, right over here. So like I said, my name is Mark Cruz. Work at Gallatin. I'm just hit 1 year on the dark side, really enjoying it. I spent 10 years on the public side, and it's been a pleasure working with clients and different folks around Oregon, so I look forward to giving today's update. But one thing I want to clarify before I get into the substance is, you know, I often get confused with Jacob Black from Twilight. So those of you from Macaw and Quinault, you know, I'm not Jacob, all right? Years ago, when I was a teacher at St. Francis Indian School on Rosebud, I was on playground duty, and across the field, I saw a fight break out. And so as the teacher, I ran across the field to go break it up. And I'll never forget Darwin Walking Eagle yelling, "Don't turn into a wolf, Mr. Cruz." So anyway, real quick, here in the Oregon House, we have some newer leadership. You'll see there that we have a new speaker, Julie Fahey from Eugene, Majority Leader Ben Bowman from Tigard. We have Auntie Tana there at Ways and Means Co-Chair. You'll hear from her after this panel. And then we have Republican Leader Jeff Helfrich. This is a very, very, very new leadership team. Jeff Helfrich has been the Republican leader for a year, and he's the dean of all caucus leaders. So that just gives you a sense of how new leadership is across the House. And for those of you that aren't very familiar with the Oregon legislative districts, here's a quick photo to show you. And one thing that's unique about Oregon is we have 60 legislative seats and we have 30 Senate seats. And we couple every Senate seat with 2 legislative seats, so you see overlap. So in terms of the elections in 35 days, we have a number of different House races that are very competitive. And while I won't go into each and every single one of these, a couple of them do stand out. We do have a tribal member in HD 40, Anessa Hartman, in a very close race. I also want to point out that we have a tough race over in Central Oregon, HD 53. You'll see there at the bottom, Emerson Levy and Kerry Lopez. They had their first debate last night on TV. So while most of you were watching the Seahawks, I was watching a state legislative debate. I will say that in the last 2 months, a lot of these races have shifted about 5 points from Republicans to Democrats, and a lot of that's because of the national atmospherics, the change in the Democrat presidential nominee. We see that playing out in legislative races across Oregon. And so I guess for me, you'll see at the bottom here, there are 35 Democrats, 25 Republicans. With these races, if I were to handicap this today, I do think that the Democrats probably pick up another seat and get to 36-24. Check with me November 6th, see if I'm right. Over on the Senate, we have, again, a very new leadership team. Rob Wagner from Lake Oswego is Senate President. Kathleen Taylor, Southwest Portland. Ways and Means Co-Chair Kate Lieber, and Republican leader Daniel Bonham. I will say that Daniel Bonham does have experience with tribes. He served on the Legislative Commission for Indian Affairs. He used to have Warm Springs in his district, and redistricting moved that reservation out of his district. But he does have that experience. And I want to give credit where credit is due. Senate President Wagner actually attended the Governor's Tribal Nation Summit in Canyonville earlier this summer. It was nice to see him there and really come in with an open heart and open mind and try and learn the issues because his district is the size of a postage stamp with very little tribal presence. And I will say that Majority Leader Kate Lieber, when she was visiting the coast last year, we helped facilitate a meeting with Coquille. She was there for her daughter's volleyball game and had an hour to spare. And so I want to give credit where credit's due. When legislators go out and make meaningful relationships, it matters in the long run. And these are the Senate districts. Again, you'll see a lot of familiarity with the House districts. And in the Senate, there's only really 3 contested close races, if you will. That first one there, Senate District 5, is out on the coast. Dick Anderson is the incumbent. He is a Republican. The registration advantage is heavy to the Dems as well as non-affiliated voters. However, he used to be mayor of Lincoln City, has a fabulous relationship with the Siletz, has that experience. And so he's done a fantastic job of working in a bipartisan and cooperative manner. Senate District 25, not far from here, over in the Gresham area, Troutdale, East Multnomah County. Chris Gorsuch, sitting incumbent. He is currently up in the polls. And then we do have an open seat, Senate District 27, Anthony Broadman versus Michael Summers. Many of you may have heard of or know Anthony. He serves as counsel to Cow Creek, but he is a Bend City councilor, lives on the east side of the Cascades, and so the latest polling I saw was he was up in that race. So my bold prediction is the Senate goes from, let's go back real quick. You see there it's 17 Democrats, 12 Republicans, 1 non-affiliated. My best guess right now is that non-affiliated, he's retiring. The Democrats pick up a seat. We end up at 18-12. Again, talk to me on November 6th. In 35 days, there's a number of ballot measures that will be decided on Election Day. I'll just give a quick overview of these. The first one is impeachment of statewide elected executives. This includes the governor and other statewide office holders. In Oregon, we realized there was no process for impeaching a sitting governor, and so this was a referral to the voters for them to decide whether or not that we want to create that process. Ballot Measure 116, an Independent Public Service Compensation Commission amendment. What does that mean? The legislators took a pass on raising their own pay, and they're kicking it to a commission. So this is the vote to decide whether or not we set up that commission, and it would be more than just legislators. It would be other statewide officials. I will say that because we live in a part-time legislature, their salaries aren't all that great, the per diem isn't all that great, so when we start thinking about livable wages and getting the best and the brightest in the state legislature, this may or may not help. The voters of Oregon will soon decide. 117, ranked choice voting for federal and state elections. You've seen this in other states like Alaska and Maine. Oregon will be looking at doing something similar for those bigger races. Notice that I did not include some of the more local elections. Ballot Measure 118, this is a big one, and this is the one that's taking up a lot of time from businesses across Oregon, one that tribes need to be aware of and begin to engage in. This one is very technical, but what it does is it calls for a 3% gross receipts tax on corporations with more than 25 million in annual sales. If passed, this tax would collect about 6.8 billion is the estimate right now, and would be redistributed to Oregonians as a rebate, despite without income guardrails or age guardrails. Proponents of Measure 118 estimate that each Oregonian could receive $1,600 a year, regardless of age or income, beginning in 2027. Measure 18 would go into effect on January 1, 2025, so in 3 months, and businesses would begin incurring the tax within at the new year. So that's a big one to watch. I anticipate that being probably the closest ballot measure. It does have a very favorable ballot title, so we'll see what happens. And then 119, cannabis unions. This would require cannabis retailers, processors, labs, and others to submit labor neutrality agreements with the union to the OLCC when they apply or renew their licenses. And so then we'll take a quick look at some of the statewide races occurring. So we have the Attorney General is up this year in Oregon. The current Attorney General is retiring, so we have a big race here. Will Lathrop is the Republican candidate. Dan Rayfield is the Democrat candidate. I will say Oregon is very lucky to have these two. I'm personal friends with both of them, and of all the statewide races, I anticipate this one probably being the closest. Fundraising-wise, they've both raised over $1 million, so we'll see what kind of national money comes in from outside. Secretary of State, Tobias Reed is the current treasurer. Dennis Linthicum is currently a state senator. He's leaving the state senate because he walked out, and the voters of Oregon decided to make it so that you couldn't run again, upheld by the Oregon Supreme Court. So he's running for this. Similarly, in the treasurer race, we have Brian Boquist there on the right. Current state senator, can't run again, so he's running for statewide office. Elizabeth Steiner, former co-chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee. I anticipate she'll handily win this race. So looking ahead to 2025, at the end of the year, the governor's requested budget will come out. That kind of is the starting point for what programs get authorized, what numbers they get. Organizational days is January 13th, first day of session, January 21st. And in Oregon, we have a 160-day maximum for session, so they have to be done by June 28th. That's the most important date in this entire slide. So how an idea becomes law in Oregon, I won't go through all of it, but I will simply put it, it's complicated, and it keeps guys like me employed. In terms of 2025 legislative activity, here are a couple buckets. Transportation package, you've heard it from my colleague in Washington. You heard it yesterday. What does that look like? You know, driving up here from Salem, Oregon this morning, we need a new bridge. That thing is crazy to drive across, and I can't imagine doing it every single day. But how wide is this package going to be? We don't know. It's going to depend on the number we get from economic revenue forecasts. What do the advocates say? So I'm hearing it could be smaller in nature, or it could be broader. A lot of that will depend on the elections as well. Housing. This has been a priority of the governor. I don't think that's going to change. We see it across communities in the Northwest. We need more housing. We need more CADXs, we need to cut red tape and bureaucracy to move earth and get the sticks up. A couple other things, Recycling Modernization Act. This is something that the Department of Environmental Quality is currently working on. A lot of businesses and industries are unhappy with implementation. Will the legislature come in and try and do some fixes? We'll see. Changes to the Climate Protection Program. It was struck down on procedural grounds by the Oregon State Supreme Court, and DEQ's come back with a new rule. Some people have said it's worse than the first version, so we'll see. We'll see if legislators stand up to the agency or not. That'll be their prerogative. Wildfire response, including new emerging issues with individuals who can't get their policies renewed or their premiums are out of hand. So how does the legislature grapple with that? Because that's impacting all economic spectrums. Drought and water is always an issue that we need to be watching, as is education funding. There will be renewed, vigorous fights over that. And taxes, as Biggie Smalls said, more money, more problems. So we'll see what happens, and that's why we looked at the legislative races, because what 36 means and what 18 means is the Democrats will have supermajorities and the ability to raise taxes. So tribal bills, again, giving credit where credit is due. Governor Kotek has done a fantastic job of engaging with tribes across Oregon. The Tribal Council Task Force, there's going to be a date change. Originally, they were targeting the end of this year with their report. Sounds like there's more work that needs to be done, so I anticipate a date change there. What does the MMIP alert system look like? Data sovereignty, tribal housing, tribal water, tribal law enforcement, and then something close and personal to me is Oregon DHS. As a former ward of the court, I believe child care, foster care, and ICWA issues should always be at the table. And so I look forward to seeing what gets done there, because what DHS is doing right now is substandard and should appall everybody in this room. They should be doing better. Our children deserve better, especially our tribal children under their supervision. And there's Chairman Willie Ray and Governor Kotek just a couple months ago. It's a wonderful day down in Chiloquin. So I want to say thank you. Here are the two most famous people at ATNI, Bronson Jet Gunn. I have been fortunate to meet the man himself. And then there's Chairman Allen. This was actually a week before the global pandemic got kind of came out, and we were in Washington, D.C., and I was like, Chairman, how are you getting home? And he grabbed the scooter off the sidewalk and took off. And so it's the only evidence I have of that. And so while I have a minute, I'll end with this as a transition. I was told this a few years ago, and it's especially relevant today, but I have an example here of an election, and recently there was a politician that went out to an Indian reservation, and he was campaigning hard because he needed their vote. So he gets up in front of council and general counsel sitting there, and he begins to go through his platform and starts saying that if you guys elect me, I'm going to create more jobs for the reservation. And everyone in the crowd started clapping and yelling, Hoya, Hoya. And then he said, and when I get elected, I'm going to create more health care and more housing. And the room started going wild, Hoya, Hoya, Hoya. And they started stomping their feet. So later that day, the politician and the chairman were out taking a tour of the reservation and went and looked at a ranch. And the politician said, let me get out, I want to go take a closer look. And so the rancher said, just be careful of the Hoya when you get out there.
So, thank you, Maureen. Thank you much. That's a good report and also very entertaining. I love the picture of Ron. That is so cool. I wonder if he even made it around the block on that thing. Those things are so hard to ride on. But thank you. On to next, our very own Jeannie State. We have the Idaho State report. So thank you. Kaj, yep, Kaj, that's right. She corrected me. Thank you.
Oh, that was a great report, Mark. I appreciate that. I've got to get this microphone a little taller here for me real quick. So I was thinking about, Mark's disclaimer about causing pandemics. I'm not sure I'm very convinced about that. And I was sitting here also reeling about the Seahawks loss last night. And I thought, well, if Mark's not to blame for the pandemic, he's at the very least to blame for the Seahawks loss last night. So maybe if you're watching the Hawks play last night, they would have won instead, Mark. Dang it. Good morning, everybody. My name is Kaj Matheson. It is my honor and privilege to give the Idaho report, and I'm kind of chuckling inside because they got 20 minutes for me up here, but as you guys are aware, things are pretty quiet in Idaho, and that's always good news for Idaho, and so my report would be fairly short. In fact, I'm going to go over a couple things that if you guys saw me do the report last time, a couple of these things are going to actually be repeats, but they're still relevant, so I think they're important to mention. So I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of what happened in this last legislative session. So first, I'm going to talk about House Bill 410 in Idaho, and this has to do with income earned by Native Americans living off reservation. So in 2014, the Coeur d'Alene Tribe sponsored a bill that really clarified the law, saying that Indians earning income on the reservation are exempt from Idaho state income taxes. It was a kind of a bit of a controversial thing at the time, and so we sought this opportunity to clarify that rule. Ultimately, it passed, and in recent years, there was some question, okay, well, what about Native Americans living off reservation in a different state? So some tax preparers and some staff members from the Idaho Tax Commission raised some questions about that, and so House Bill 410 sought to clarify that, and we ultimately got that passed and clarified that Native Americans living in a different state, say in Washington, both Idaho or Coeur d'Alene Tribe and Nez Perce Tribe in particular had tribal members that lived in Washington and worked on the reservation, and so this passed with flying colors. It was a unanimous vote, and it was passed and signed into law by the Idaho governor, officially exempting Native Americans living off the reservation from paying taxes. House Bill 496, this was interesting because in the very last days of the 2023 session, the Idaho legislature passed a bill in a law that prohibited foreign governments from buying farmland and water rights in Idaho. The bill was really designed for foreign countries like China from buying huge amounts of land in the state of Idaho. And the problem was that it defined a foreign government as any government other than a state, the United States, or its territories or possessions. The issue obviously is that the tribes are not a state or a territory or possession. And so it raised a lot of questions about whether or not this was going to be an attempt to try to prohibit tribes from acquiring lands. As so many of us are aware, one of the challenges that we have as tribes is being able to go back and reacquire lands that were lost through historical circumstances. And so this was important for us to make sure that that was fixed so we don't run into any issues moving forward. We were able to get that bill passed with flying colors as well. Senate Bill 1247 really added to existing law that really allowed certain law officials, law authorities to be able to detain people that were suffering from acute mental distress and transport them to hospitals. So that was really important. We ended up being able to include tribes as a part of that, which was an important recognition of tribal sovereignty, allowing our officers to be able to act on really dangerous circumstances that were happening on the street, and really was a support of that cross-jurisdictional cooperation, which we find, especially in checkerboarded reservations, as being essential to the success of law enforcement. That was passed and signed by the governor as well. Senate Bill 1313 added to the law, existing law, which established the Idaho Council on Indian Affairs. This council is an important advisory council to the legislature itself. It's made up of 2 senators, 2 representatives, a representative from the governor's office, and an elected leader from each of the 5 federally recognized tribes in Idaho. We basically changed that so that the structure of it was to have a chairman and vice chairman as the leadership role, and we ultimately changed it to include co-chairs, one that will be filled by the legislature and the other one that will be filled by one of the elected leaders from the tribes. So that's an important win for the tribes, just to make sure that we're always having this leadership role on this advisory council to the legislature moving forward. Also, a couple of years ago, we were able to work with the governor who created the Coeur d'Alene Lake Advisory Committee. This is specific to the Coeur d'Alene tribe, where we're a part of the Bunker Hill Superfund sites, one of the largest contamination sites and Superfund sites in the United States, really even in the world. And what's interesting about it is the Environmental Protection Agency, when they went through and they said, okay, we're going to create this Superfund site and identify the areas where we're going to clean up on. If you look at the map, the very center of that area is Coeur d'Alene Lake, which is the heart and soul of the Coeur d'Alene people. That ultimately was exempted from the record of decision by the Environmental Protection Agency as a result of heavy political pressures from local business interests and groups, and the state of Idaho in particular, who did not want the Coeur d'Alene Lake itself, which was an economic driver in northern Idaho, to be a part of this remedy. And so we were able to, as a matter of science and years of pressure, finally get the governor to create the Coeur d'Alene Lake Advisory Committee, where he committed $33 million to lake cleanup, which sounds nice. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar cleanup project. So it's a nice step in the right direction, but it's not the grand fix of everything. So our hope is, moving forward, we'll continue to see Idaho be able to make some steps toward cleaning up of Coeur d'Alene Lake, which has been a very long, decades-long, century-long issue in contamination and cleanup. Moving forward, and thinking about, we have some important, issues coming up in the upcoming legislative session. We have some issues really related to income for, hold on just for a second. Income and funding for education, for water rights, and for Medicaid. Those are going to be important debates and issues that are going to be coming up in the next legislative session. The issue that we have, I think we see this internally, right, is we're starting to see inside, in particular, the Republican Party, a lot of tension and friction that we see playing out in Idaho right before our very eyes, where we see different aspects of the party kind of jockeying for control. So we really don't know how that's going to shape up in Idaho moving forward. So our eyes really are on this next election season. So Idaho is one of 12 states that runs their elections on a 2-year cycle. So that means the entire legislature is up for elections. And we're starting to see some, in the primaries, in the caucuses, some really important races shaping up, very close races in particular when it comes to the leadership in the Senate, that we really don't know which way it's going to go. So our eyes are really fixated on that. We're going to keep tabs on that and try to figure out how we can ultimately work with the people that are going to be there. We don't know who we're going to be working with in this upcoming year, and that always makes things a little bit more unstable for us. So with that, that's all I have for the state of Idaho. Thank you. Liam Lynch.